Am I really trans? I never worn a skirt before, I never played with dolls, and I used to hate it when people called me a girl when I was younger, so surely I can't want to be a girl. I can't be trans, right? I'm not that special. I'm not that lucky, right? If you haven't caught on yet, these are all thoughts that I had when I was younger. They're thoughts that delayed the acceptation of my identity and my transness and really led to me losing some time living as my authentic self. And for that reason, I want to say if you've ever had any similar thoughts, or perhaps even these exact same thoughts, that you're not alone, and come listen, because you are enough. Hello my darlings, and welcome to my little corner of the internet where I share the things that I've learned and discovered about myself as a trans woman. Now, something that I think a lot of people feel when they're first questioning or coming to terms with their identities is imposter syndrome and kind of feeling enough. So, the Oxford English Dictionary, yes, I am biased with my dictionary choice, defines imposter syndrome as the persistent inability to believe that one's success is deserved or has been legitimately achieved as a result of one's own efforts or skills. Relating this back to the world of trans identity, you can get a definition for trans imposter syndrome as the persistent inability to believe that one's own transness is legitimate or deserved. There are so many things that go into making so many of us feel like this, but before I go into it, because this might get a little confronting, I just wanted to start off by saying the definition of transness is simply identifying as a gender other than the one that you were assigned at birth. There is no list of experiences that you have to have had to identify as trans. There's no barrier that you have to overcome. Simply feeling like you are transgender is enough. You don't have to live up to anyone's expectations either. It's not a scale, so there's no such thing as being enough to identify as trans. It's simply just a yes or a no, and you're allowed to answer however you feel. Before I get started, I want to give a quick shout out to the Gender Dysphoria Bible, which is maintained and mostly written by Jocelyn Badgley, as well as this book right here, which is He, She, They by Skylar Baylor. Both of these resources really helped me develop my ideas around this subject, and they've got a lot more in them if you're interested, so I highly recommend them, and I'll leave their information down in the description. Now, as we're going to be talking a lot about society, I think maybe it's best if we take it to the sofa and join the cat. Let's go, shall we? Well, we might as well start off with a big one. Society has done a fantastic job at making trans people doubt in themselves and in their identities. From the moment that we were born, and the doctor looks at our external genitalia and says, "Oh, that's a boy," or "Oh, that's a girl," we are fed subtle and not so subtle messages that we should follow what is expected of our assigned gender. And if we deviate from these expectations, we have to prove that we're something special. We're sold this narrative that a transgender individual knows that their gender differs from the one they were assigned at birth from a very young age. We're told that these individuals defiantly rebel against their parents until they let them play with the other gender's toys and let them dress in the other gender's clothes and have the other gender's haircut. We're told that these individuals look like their actual gender rather than one they were assigned at birth throughout their entire lives, or at least androgynous. And this is regardless if they've medically transitioned or not. The story becomes that a transgender individual has stereotypically acted and behaved and even looked like their actual gender from the day they were brought into this world. If the glaringly obvious binarity of this narrative hasn't made it obvious to you yet, this is a story by cis people, for cis people. It's a narrative where cis people don't really have to question anything because gender norms are pretty much fully respected. Now don't get me wrong, some transgender individuals do have this exact experience and that is perfectly valid, but the fact remains that most trans people don't have this perfect story. Using myself as an example, as I said at the beginning, I'd never played with dolls, and still to this day I never have, because I never had the chance. I grew up with an older brother and we were given boys' toys. My brother would often dictate the games, and let's face it, I enjoyed those toys and I enjoyed those games. Well, not all of them. The one where he kicked my shins really hurt. And let's face it, toys are unnecessarily gendered anyway. Strip away all that gendered marketing, give a kid with an imagination any toy and they'll find a way to enjoy it. I'd never really worn any traditionally feminine clothing either because once I grew into a boy, it wasn't safe for me to do so, and even in secret I was too scared because it had been drilled into me that it was wrong. So what I'm trying to say is that I didn't have the perfect narrative and I didn't have the chance to. Many of us don't have the chance to have that perfect narrative. I've also talked about my childhood a little bit more in this video here, so check that out if you want to see some more. But what I really want to iterate is that this experience, this differing from the perfect narrative, doesn't make my transness or anyone else's transness any less valid. And even though I enjoyed aspects of being raised perceived as a boy, it doesn't take away from my transness either or make me any less valid. I grew up accepting that I was a boy because that's what I was told, and it still doesn't invalidate my transness. I didn't even know that it was possible to be anything different, and even when I did find out, there were still other things holding me back from answering yes to the question of, am I really trans? And one of those things is something that I don't really like mentioning, but it's there nonetheless, and that's being trans is scary. Especially when you're questioning, transition seems so full of unknowns and tough, it's daunting. You really feel like you've got to be 100% sure that you're trans to actually take the first step or experiment, because otherwise it doesn't feel like it's going to be worth it. Once again, it's society that makes it so difficult for us because they've told us we should be 100% sure about our transness since the day we were born practically, and yet they've made that impossible because they fed our self-doubts all that time. They never gave us the chance and they've made us live a cis life, and it hasn't all been bad, so those doubts set in that maybe you're not trans because you're told that you should hate every moment of living as a cis person. And it gets to a point where it becomes impossible to learn to listen and accept yourself without taking the first steps and experimenting and trying. And sometimes this can be made paradoxically more difficult by seeing trans celebrities and trans creators online who are so brave and confident and assured in their own gender. It can really make it seem that we've got to be that way from the start. And in some ways, I hope that I'm an example of someone who's confident and assured in their gender. But listen to me, I haven't always been this way. I spent years with my doubts, and I spent probably over a decade avoiding questioning altogether because I was scared. I wasn't brave in the beginning, and the thing that motivated me to taking those first steps was the motivation to live. It was that difficult for me at the beginning. And just as my doubts don't invalidate my transness, your doubts don't invalidate yours either. These are present in so many of us because we were taught to feel this way. And that's why if you're questioning or have your doubts, I strongly encourage you to take some time and space to experiment whilst actively trying not to judge yourself. Try and see how you feel on an instinctual level and not how those feelings have been mutated by the layers of transphobia that were installed in you. Try to see if it's the internalized transphobia that's making you question if you're really trans because you're trying to force the answer to be no. And there are other worries that can really motivate us to question if we really are trans. These are things like, am I going to be conventionally attractive enough? Or is there some specific physical feature of me that's going to make it impossible to transition? These are really common fears and they're really tough to face, but try to remember that you don't have to be conventionally attractive to be pretty. You don't have to be the perfect model to be valid, and you're beautiful regardless, and, well, you never know if you don't try. Another thing I want to make clear is that you do not have to have gender dysphoria to be trans. Hey, can you guess what I'm going to say next? That's right, society. They really have spun the narrative that every trans person inherently feels like they're in the wrong body and they suffer crippling gender dysphoria when they look in the mirror. You still don't need to ever have experienced gender dysphoria to be trans, but consider this. I spent most of my life thinking that I didn't have gender dysphoria. Why? Because I'd always felt that way. I'd lived my entire life with that feeling, and it wasn't until I stole my ex's clothes, put on my makeup, and looked in the mirror without judging that I had alleviated some of that gender dysphoria, and I realized what I'd been feeling all along. I couldn't really be dysphoric over not seeing a girl in the mirror because I hadn't realized I was a girl yet. And now let's also talk about the fact that you may be looking for some logical or scientific explanation to prove your transness, to prove that it's real. But this burden of proof has never been placed on cis people. I don't think a cis person has ever been sat down and asked to list off reasons as to why they think they're cis. Say it with me, everyone. Society has put us under this pressure to need to prove our transness because it's not the assumed identity. Look, I get it. Being cis is statistically way more likely, but that doesn't mean that it's okay for the statements "I'm cis" and "I'm trans" to carry different burdens of proof. Ask yourself, if these statements needed no proof other than how you feel, what would your answer be? What feels right? Your answer is valid, and you don't need to logically or scientifically prove it. How you feel is all you need. There's so much more that I could talk about on this topic because there are so many doubts because that's what society taught us to do. There are so many hurdles in the way of us accepting our identities because of transphobia, because of cisnormativity. The main takeaway is that you really do not need to fit into any box that anyone presents to you, regardless if that's cis society that tells you or trans society. I'll most likely discuss this in another video in the future, but you don't need to fit into the stereotypes that the trans community puts forward either. I certainly don't fit into a lot of them. So, if you made it this far, I really hope you know that you are valid no matter how you feel. You can call yourself trans simply because that's how you feel. You don't need to live up to any expectations or anyone else, or live the same experiences as any other trans person. You are valid. And you're enough, and you are so worth accepting yourself. And there we are at the end of another video, and I am exhausted. Not only is that a topic that affects me quite personally, this is also the 4th time that I've filmed this. The first 2 I wasn't satisfied with how it came out, and then the 3rd one I was really happy with, but the audio messed up. And so here we are on the 4th time, and I really hope that I've done it justice. So, if you liked the video, please give it a like and feel free to subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and maybe leave a comment down below with how you overcame some of your self-doubts. But regardless, as always, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.